let's start. So we may be joined by a few more people. So as ever with these things, lovely to see you. Thank you very much. Happy 2018. Would you mute yourself unless you're talking, please? That would be great, just to keep the ambient noise down. And so, as I said on the Facebook group, and it's so interesting to me how the minute I mention anything about neuroscience, everybody's like, "Oh yeah," and it's really funny because it's a while since I've kind of been around that whole neuroscience conversation, and I'm kind of getting back into it. So I wanted to share some of that with you. Well, let me ask you, who's got something to say about why they were keen on this topic, or why they were interested in coming along? Or was it for that, or did you just want to come along to the Zoom call anyway? Natalie?
I think what immediately sprung to mind for me is that is there something we can actively see that's going on in our brains when this happens, to just give some more sense than just a pure leap of faith that actually we've got something crucial that's going on and we can see it. So I guess that's what occurred to me. If I don't know whether that be the same occurrence in anyone else's thoughts.
Okay, Mark, then Kate.
Yeah, I think I'd just like to add to that and say that because Kim, as you know, with me, is always trying to intellectualize all this. So if there's some evidence and science that I can lock into, for lack of another way of putting it, that would help me hugely.
Yeah. Well, there certainly is, and you know, increasingly so, actually. So very good, Kate.
I like the element light within the word enlightenment, because I haven't been feeling particularly light at the moment, so that kind of attracted me, but also just kind of wanted to hear from everybody and take part. So
yeah, brilliant. Hi Karen. Yes, Andrea.
Hi, I'm a havening practitioner.
Right.
So anything to do with neuro interests me. I believe without the science, but let's say that everybody else seems to need the backup of proof. Well, most people do anyway. Perhaps somewhat less in the UK. I practice in France as well.
Oh, do you?
Yeah, I need the scientific backup, definitely.
Yes. Okay.
That's why I was attracted tonight.
Okay, cool. Well, shall I just get going then? And as I say, I'm going to record this. I'm also going to be, probably tomorrow or over the weekend, I'm going to write a blog about it. So you'll have anything that I mention about the various research and the scientists and so on, that will all be in the blog. So you can go and look at, so don't worry about making loads of notes about particular detail unless you want to. So, you know, as a long-time explorer of truth, I've been getting interested again recently in the whole neuroscience piece. And it's fair to say that for a few years, I kind of dropped out of that particular aspect of the study of human potential, not because I didn't think it was interesting or useful, but because I discovered something even more fundamental than what's going on in this kind of 3-pound lump of marvelous engineering jelly called the human brain. But as many of you know, it's been something that's interested me my whole life, and you know, back to the whole brain-friendly learning days of really kind of keeping up to date on what's going on, and I still find it fascinating. I find it fascinating, and having some recent serendipitous conversations with people have led me to people inside the principles and outside. Have led me coming across some research going on in the scientific community about what happens in the brains of people who've had some kind of enlightenment or awakening experience. And you know, if you're interested, if you're looking at kind of who are the happiest people on the planet, sometimes they call it happiest, or who's got the highest well-being on the planet, and it seems to be these people who have, you know, woken up, and there's loads and loads of different names for it, as you know, in different traditions: enlightened, non-dual, God consciousness, unity consciousness, transcendental consciousness, persistent mystical experience, or even shamanic ecstasy. There's a guy called Dr. Jeffrey Martin who's been a researcher for the last 10 years. He's a neuroscientist with a PhD from Harvard, and also another PhD, I think, from the School of Integrative Studies. And he's been exploring the patterns and similarities between people from all over the globe and from all sorts of different traditions that have had these Enlightenment experiences. And he's, since about 2006, he's been doing this, and he's just at the stage of kind of publishing quite a lot of it. He's basically thousands of people, you know, he's given them what he would call the gold standard set of cognitive questionnaires and well-being questionnaires, and mapped it across, and also done loads and loads and loads of brain scans, so loads of fMRI, that kind of thing, to look at which areas of the brain were different. And, you know, they definitely are. So in the same way as your London taxi driver, you know, we all know their brains structurally become different after they've done the knowledge. These awakened people, again, their brain is structurally different. And the term that this guy, Dr. Jeffrey Martin, uses for it, for want of a better one, is PNSE, which stands for Persistent Non-Symbolic Experience, which is a bit of a mouthful, PNSE, or sometimes Persistent Non-Symbolic Consciousness. And the persistent in it means that you only kind of get counted in the research if you have been this way for a year or longer, like consistently, all the time. So this isn't like a kind of glimpse and then you come back to everyday stuff. This is just like seemingly a permanent state, which I got very excited about. And I'll talk in a moment about what that feels like subjectively, or what, you know, how people describe or characterize that experience. And when he asked people how they kind of got there, in a way, there were loads and loads of different roadmaps. There were techniques that people had used in some cases, and he found some correlation between those. But there was no one-size-fits-all thing. And of course, for some people, it seemed to be completely unlooked for, unsearched for, and spontaneous. A few people that kind of had a near-death experience reported it, and but also just kind of people who just in the middle of, I don't know, you know, having a game of golf or sitting in a business meeting, suddenly, pow, this thing happened, and they weren't kind of particularly chasing it. And of course, there's no linear relationship either. So if you take, you know, he has found the top technique, if you're going to look at techniques, is meditation. But you can, as you know, you can meditate for 50 years and not achieve this state, or you can do it for 20 minutes and have it, you know, have this awakening. So it's not a kind of a route map in the sense of do these 7 things and this is what's going to happen. So, and interestingly, he and his team have found, and I've actually been in email conversation with him about this, he's found that there's been a dramatic increase starting to take place around 1996, where more and more people are transitioning to this persistent non-symbolic experience. And there's lots of potential reasons for that. It could be the kind of, Sheldrake's 100th monkey idea. It could actually be the rise of the internet, because, prior to that, people didn't really have a place to talk about it or share or find a teacher or whatever it was they wanted to do. But it seems like if there's a membrane that you have to go through, you have to pass through, that membrane is becoming thinner somehow, is how he would describe it. So, how does it feel? Well, I find this so interesting to compare with my experience, or since I've come across the 3 principles of, things like clarity, well-being, being home. So listen to this: effortless peace of mind. Oh, hello, Karen. Hi.
Hi.
Hi. Lovely to see you. Would you mind muting yourself? Thank you. So effortless peace of mind, bliss, clarity, profound okayness, safe, whole, highly functional, so much more space in your mental apparatus. Mind really has become the servant rather than the master. Increasingly positive emotions and negative emotions fall away because you're not driving those with the old stories. But the key thing that really struck me is there seems to be the part of your mind that is constantly having self-referenced thinking. So thinking about yourself, which one of the other researchers calls, and I love this phrase, he calls it your blah blah network. The blah blah network in the brain that is responsible for, and many of us, as we know, spend like the vast majority of our thinking is that. It's thinking about me, it's thinking about myself, it's thinking about how am I coming across, it's thinking about what would they think of me. It's kind of loads of judgment, but very, very self-referenced. And that apparently in this state just switches off entirely. So you can imagine how much more space there is, and how much more settled you are, and how much less judgment there is, and how much more clarity you have. So this other guy, another academic researcher, the one that came up with blah blah, and he's the one that, and again I can put this in the blog with reference to the material, he's actually shown this very, very dramatic difference when this blah blah network is switched off. And so it's literally a kind of a transcendence of the self. And for myself, I've gradually over the last 7 years, it's felt to me like there is a gradual erosion of this self-referenced thinking. My mind is quieter than it's ever been before in my life, and it's wonderful. And even, I don't know how many of you, familiar with good old Maslow back in the day, which I can remember teaching, my God, 30 years ago. But Maslow, the way most people know it is the top of the, it's the hierarchy of human needs. So you have to kind of have one level satisfied before you can go on up to the next level in the pyramid. And what most people think of as the pinnacle of that is this thing that Maslow called self-actualization, which tends to be peak experiences. And little known by people is towards the end of his life, Maslow himself actually added a further level beyond that, which he called self-transcendence. So it's above self-actualization and it's self-transcendence. And he talked about the shift from dependency consciousness to being consciousness. So I thought that was interesting because, that was back in the 40s, 50s. So actually, I'm going to pause at that point. I've got some more stuff about the sort of implications of it, but I'd just love to hear you guys and your take on that so far. Any questions you've got, or anything you want to kind of add or just comment or observe on. Just raise your hand if you'd like to say something. Yes, Kate.
Just a question about how it links to consciousness. And does it mean that you are at the ultimate point of consciousness if you are in that transcendent state?
I think that's what they're saying. Yes, that the consciousness transcends self-consciousness, and it just becomes pure consciousness. So you disappear effectively.
Gosh, okay. And are you saying that you're there, or you've been there, or that you're? No, I'm not saying I'm there at all. But what I have noticed is a shift away. I mean, it would be impossible to do, but if I were to count the number of self-referenced thoughts I have in a day now compared to 7 years ago, it's far, 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 far less. And I spend far, 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 far more time in that state of clarity, well-being, home, even bliss. Yeah.
And for no reason, so it's not linked to anything that's happening on the outside. So that's pretty cool. But yeah, the persistent non-symbolic experienced people, that's what it's like for them all the time.
Thank you.
Apparently. Yes. Mark.
Yeah, for those people you mentioned who weren't necessarily trying to get there, who found themselves there, how did they know they were there if they weren't even trying to get there?
Well, all sorts of things, they'd say to, some of them even went to the doctor because they thought they were going mad. Or one of the guys, one of the case studies, checked themselves into a psychiatric institution because they just didn't understand what was going on. But for a lot of them, it happened spontaneously, and it was fine that it did. So it was kind of, oh, this is cool. This is really nice. And he talks a lot in his research about how he found them, and some of them were kind of, they'd gravitated, after that had happened, they gravitated towards certain groups or places or teachers but he kind of asked for volunteers. So he kind of put this, thing out asking for people who felt like that to get in touch, and then didn't take them at their word. As I say, went through this huge battery of tests and brain scans and everything. And, they're quite savvy. So I think managed to weed out the kind of, I want to be in that group. So I'm going to talk about it as though I am. So yeah, I don't know why that should happen to certain people and not others, but.
One other quick question. You mentioned self-referencing.
Yes.
What do you mean by that?
Okay, so any thought, in your case, that's to do with Mark's experience, Mark's life, Mark's marriage, Mark's job, Mark's career, Mark's feelings, Mark's thinking, Mark's body, Mark.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
And you think about the conversations you and I have had in the past, and it's where all the suffering comes from are those kind of thoughts. So in the principles we say, it's all suffering comes from thought, but I'd kind of refine that and say suffering doesn't come from all thought. It comes from self-reference thinking. It comes from thought that is So, but if you had a thought, say, Mark, about how to, you know, a great idea came up for something that you wanted to, you know, to solve a problem at work, or you wanted to become more productive, or not for you, not so you look good, but just because it was kind of interesting. Or if you were thinking about, you know, life in a kind of universal sense, or nature, or people, or, but, you know, so it's saying, what they're saying is that there's a whole load of really, really useful thinking that serves humanity. But a lot of people spend, as I say, a ridiculously large proportion of their time with this self-reference stuff.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, great. Yes, Andrea.
I've had experiences in my coaching, in havening, and with animals where basically I disappear and I just attract.
Yeah.
Is that the same thing?
Yeah, I think so. It's so that would be what, you know, what they would call what I would call a kind of you know, temporary. So it's non-persistent at the moment.
Yeah, it's non-persistent, but it happens on a more and more frequent basis when I just put myself out the way, as it were.
Yeah.
I call it emptying out of all intention for me.
Yes. And does it feel similar to that kind of list of things that I described?
Oh yeah, I've had coaching experiences as a trainer on coaching groups where I didn't feel that I was me as such, but that I was, I see more energies than people, or I don't say people, animals, whatever, it's energies.
Yeah.
And I've had more recently experiences along those lines, involving humans and animals.
Yes.
And
yes, that's brilliant.
Yeah, so that's what you're referring to.
Yeah, I think it's the same. I think it's the same thing. And this incredible, you know, it's not so much that the self disappears, because you are suddenly kind of thrown into the whole. Mm. So, you know, we talk about this sense of connection to everything, and, you know, and that's people, animals, trees, rocks. You know, it's everything. You just become part of that oneness.
Yeah, as I've heard trees growing, for example, or dogs just come up to me. So that would be what you're talking about.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. Right, because I've had no name for it. So now I have something.
Oh, there you have. Now you have.
Thank you.
Anything else before I go on? Okay, cool. So one of the other interesting things is that this Dr. Martin talks about is that, you know, you might say, well, why is it so few people, and also, you know, why do perhaps even the vast majority of people, certainly a lot of the people that I bump around against most of the time, are they kind of, it seems like their deep psychological wiring is the opposite of that. So it's self-referenced, it's fear, it's anxiety, it's scarcity. And he's got, you know, a very kind of biological evolutionary explanation for that, which kind of makes sense, and it's not a new idea, but that our genetics and what he calls our deep psychology takes a long time to evolve. So if you think about, you know, tens of thousands of years ago, it made absolute sense to be kind of hardwired in a way for fear, anxiety, and scarcity, because it, you know, it was life or death. But we're kind of, takes a long time to catch up. So in a way, we're sort of, a lot of people are living wired for the wrong period. So, you know, it's like we're still wired in many ways for the way it was tens of thousands of years ago. And he talks about awakenings on a kind of human universal scale, and he talks about something called the fourth awakening. So he reckons we're just coming into the fourth one. So what is an awakening? Well, it's something that so profoundly changes the world that all of the old rules no longer apply, and a powerful kind of new way of thinking arrives, and things are never the same again. So the first awakening, according to him, was about 200,000 years ago, when Homo sapiens emerged in East Africa. Then the second awakening was about 50,000 years ago. The second awakening was mostly about the emergence of spoken language, early shamans, myths, cultures. Early humans became self-aware, and while still considering themselves a part of nature, they understood that they were now different from it as well. And this is when you saw the kind of rudimentary art in the form of cave drawings and that kind of thing. And then the last great ice age ended with the something seemed to click on inside us. And during the second awakening, humanity began to perceive the future and past in new ways that enabled planning. He reckons 14,000 years ago that allowed us to begin to plant crops, keep livestock, which started to lead to larger fixed population centers. This is all kind of coming from it's coming from brain development. And as the food supply grew and became more predictable, population explosion, series of cultural revolutions. And then during the second part, the last part of the second awakening, absolutely stunning changes. In a clear example of universal consciousness, many completely independent cultures around the world, remember they didn't have Facebook, went through their own Bronze and Iron Age at kind of almost exactly the same time. And then the third awakening, he reckons, was about 3,000 years ago, and it saw the rise of all modern religions as well as science. So you've got these two things coming along, religion and science. And there was this religious explosion, the Judeo-Christian religions, and at the same time, Taoism, Confucianism in China, Shintoism in Japan, Hinduism, Buddhism in India, and later Islam. And then the explosion in science. And the fourth awakening is just beginning, and this is the one you get to participate in, whether you like it or not, because it's happening now. And all of the previous awakenings, this was interesting, I thought, he reckons they're all to do with thought. So this one's no different. The fourth awakening brings a new mode of being with it, one that goes beyond our symbols and beyond thought. And glimpses of it have been written about for thousands of years. During the fourth awakening, we will discover who and what we really are, and that it has nothing to do with the self, as most people think of it. So yeah, wow, right? And he's also written, which I've just finished reading, he's written a whole series of fiction novels, because he's a very creative guy as well, and so these fiction, they're called The Fourth Awakening. But it reads like a thriller, a series of thriller stories, but he's got all of his kind of models and ideas and the brain research and everything kind of built into these books. So they're quite an interesting read, just if you want a sort of an exciting set of stories. So that's it really. I shall pause at that point. But it kind of got me interested in the kind of links between all of that, how that all comes together for you. Does it come together for you with the three principles, with, you know, any other traditions like the Havening, other things that you're interested in? And does it kind of, does it sort of seem to resonate with your own experience? So who's got something they want to share or ask or just comment on about that? Who likes the sound of it, or does it scare the shit out of you?
I love it. I love it. Where would synchronicity fit in this?
I don't know. What do you think?
I think it's there. Well, not only think, I feel, I know. What I've been aware of was that I used to feel that things were happening around me, but now I actually see what's happening and can see the signs. Very, very often in nature, there are signs and totems, and becoming more and more aware of what's happening around me, so that I can take my work further. And, you know, for me it's there, and definitely it's all part of it. I don't talk about God, I talk about a power, a strength which flows through me, which flows through everything and everyone. So yes, for me it's there. It's definitely present. Yeah.
Great, thank you.
Thank you.
So were you putting your hands up that you like the sound of it, or something else? What do you, Natalie?
Yeah, like the sound of it. I don't think I can pinpoint any experiences I've had that really get close to that, although there's a lot of okayness and wellness and peace of mind, but sort of seeing energies or anything like that, nowhere like near. But it sounds like really interesting. I definitely like to know more. I think one question I have is, clearly the results are, you know, an immense okayness, peace of mind, states of bliss. I wonder whether there's any research on what results these people have in the world as well, like in terms of the ripple effect of that. I'm curious about. I don't know whether there is anything that exists on it.
Yeah, I think there's some. I mean, certainly in terms of, and Karen, you and I were talking about this a bit earlier today. There's you know, because I think the fear for many people is if you achieve those kinds of states of mind, you literally just sit around in your gym jams all day. What he's found is, no, these people, conversely, these people are often highly productive and successful, because you've got, you know, so much more space for that, whether you call it mind or whatever you call it, to be feeding you with great ideas. But you're doing it from a place of inspiration rather than, you know, liking creating the impossible. You're not doing it because you want to feel a certain way.
Yeah.
Because that's already a given. So then it just becomes about playing with the Play-Doh.
Yeah.
Yeah. In terms of the ripple effect on other people, I know people, I mean, and you've only got to think about the great mystics or the people that are, you know, have supposedly the enlightened people. I mean, it's incredibly attractive, and so people want to be around them. There's something I think that speaks to us at a level that is beyond the intellectual, that we kind of want to get more of that. We want to get more of that. So, I mean, look what happened with Sid Banks, you know, that how that all started with people just kind of showing up, and then more people showing up and more people showing up. But what's interesting for me about this is as many of you know, I sometimes get just a little bit concerned about what I'd call the deification of Sydney Banks. I mean, I'm sure he was enlightened, and I think he's done a tremendous service to the world. But he's not the only one. And, if this research is right, there are many, many, many more people than certainly I was aware of. And they're kind of popping up all over the place. So, there are many kind of articulations of truth.
And I think the more those come together, that can only be a good thing in terms of accelerating, just a global peace of mind.
Yeah.
Cool. Super cool.
Mark.
Oh yeah, a question of Andrea actually.
Yeah.
And I'm intrigued, Andrea. You mentioned totems.
Yeah, animal totems.
And I'd really just like to hear you talk about what you're actually seeing that is what you describe as totems.
For me, it's often birds that are in when I ask myself, I wonder daily. I wonder and I wander daily in the woods, and I'm lucky in that. And there are always birds there to speak to me. So when I ask myself a question, like what did I have recently? Robins. I know they're a seasonal bird, but I've been asking myself a lot of questions about, have I got lost in myself, got lost in the woods, can't see the wood, the wood for the trees sort of thing. And recently I went into the woods, there was a robin singing to me, and I came out and there was a robin singing to me. And that provided for me a great deal of clarity in that I took the time to listen to them. And I stopped and listened to what they had to say. Took the time out of my day to do that. I've seen kingfishers and all sorts, just at moments when I've been asking myself questions, or animals that have dogs that come up to me when I've been asking myself about whether I should be going into using my energy healing on animals. And a dog just comes up and stands in front of me when I know that it has a problem, and it just basically looks at me and asks me to touch it. So it's not a question of me getting pleasure from touching it, as you do in havening, because havening is, I don't know if you know, it's an exchange. You're creating oxytocin, serotonin for the other and for yourself. When you're doing energy healing, the energy is flowing into the other. It doesn't necessarily flow back to you. So it's a total giving experience. And I've experienced that a couple of times recently when I was in doubt. So, and people as well. But that's why I say energies, because it's not a question of whether it's a person, a plant, or an animal, vegetable, or mineral. It's something that appears when I'm asking myself a question, when I'm wondering. So that's what I call totems. Thank you for the question.
Thank you.
And thank you, Mark. Thank you, Andrea. Interestingly, the other thing that with these fMRI scans is, I don't know if it probably won't surprise you to learn that and I think this is why people kind of have over the years sought out these experiences. If you take ayahuasca or you take magic mushrooms, it's exactly the same pattern in the brain, but it's temporary, of course. So if you take an enlightened, an awakened one and look at their brain scan, and you look at somebody who's just taken a whole load of magic mushrooms, they're the same. But this one then just kind of the blah blah switches back on again afterwards. So I guess that explains why people do that kind of stuff. just think it's all really fascinating, and looking forward to finding out more. But what have you heard that kind of, as I say, comes together with the three principles, or anything else, or differs from it? You know, how's that all landed with you?
For me, I just think it makes absolute sense, Kim. You know, when you think of us as being, you know, mind, body, and spirit, all part and parcel of this, you know, this organism, I think it's very reassuring to see. Well, it just makes sense that there would be a pattern. You know, I think you talked early on about, you know, he can measure this, and there's lots of evidence, isn't there, of monks that meditate, that there is a change in, you know, we're talking a lot these days about neuroplasticity, that we're not static, we're ever changing. So I can't see it being, I think it's just very exciting that in a sense the science is able now to catch up with and illustrate that. Not that I think that anybody who already is in those states of mind, for them, they needed the proof or anything.
No.
But for those of us, certainly at this stage, where I think, Natalie, I like the way you described it, you know, my sense of, the principles was the thing that allowed me to see the truth. And since then, like lots of folk, I've explored other things and see that there's many, many other, you know, people, things that are saying the same thing. And there's just a comfort in that. But for me, the sense of well-being and sense of much more presence in my life, you know, that in a sense has been enough. And it's you know, like all human beings, we always get ourselves into that thinking about self and wanting to attain something even greater, because what I've experienced has been wonderful. If it stayed at this stage, you know, I would be a happy bunny. Life is good because, you know, there's nothing to be afraid of. You know that something has your back, and that's kind of good enough for me. I can't help but imagine that the more awareness you have, the less of that self-introspection. I can't remember what you called it a minute ago.
Self-reference. Yeah.
The suffering, as you say, is as I get into the flow of life and just do what needs to be done in a moment, rather than thinking about what needs to be done, you know, yourself comes out of it more and more. So you can only imagine that as life goes on, that will increase to some level. Whether you ever get to the enlightenment stage, I doubt, you know, everybody you kind of imagine that feels quite different. The Sid Banks experience, you know, but who cares? You know, I'm grateful that I've had and seen what I've seen so far. And the science is really helpful to see that coming together. But then they've been pointing to that for a long, long time, haven't they?
Yeah.
But no one really kind of listened. And it's nice to hear that he's talking about a fourth enlightenment, because even people like Eckhart Tolle describe the level of consciousness as increasing. But I couldn't have told you why, though. Mm. Yeah. Great stuff. And thank you so much for sharing that. You're always finding something new, something interesting, and I appreciate you taking the time to.
Oh no, you're so welcome. You're so welcome. And I think for me, I've had a few too many conversations recently in the kind of principles community, which I mean, I so buy what you just said, Karen, about, my God, if this is as good as it gets, you know, fantastic, and wouldn't have any kind of, and, you know, the gratitude and certainly not complaining. But I seem to have had a lot of conversations with people who've been around the principles a long, long time recently, who are, it's kind of, they have much lower expectations even than that. so that it's kind of, you know, one of them even said to me, oh no, like when you get the principles, life's still shit, but you understand what's happening. And I kind of, for me now, given what I've seen, I just think there's much more on offer than that.
I'm hearing contradictions, sorry.
That's all right.
Because if you're saying life's shit, then that's just you looking at life.
Yeah, exactly.
So what have they learned of the three principles then? What have they learned about us? What life is life. Life happens. You know, the only constant is change, and it moves around us, and we change constantly ourselves. But if you're saying that's life shit, then that's just your look on this. That's just your...
No, I agree. But there is this mantra in the principles sometimes, which is, no, we're having a human experience. It's a contact sport, you know, which is a Sid Banks quote. It goes up and down. It goes up and down. So there's always going to be these shit experiences at the bottom, and you know, they bother you less when you understand what's going on, and that's true. I guess what I'm saying, and what this research is kind of suggesting, is that may be the case at certain levels of consciousness. At higher levels of consciousness, it's not, because it's persistent.
It's just a question of contrast.
Yeah.
If I mix it with the law of attraction, so if you're just saying that, okay, something happens, it's a contrast with what I would like to see happening, but it doesn't mean to say it's just my view on it. It could be totally what somebody else wants to happen. It's just not what I want to happen. So, yeah.
So, Mark, Karen, Leorag, Julie, Kate, anything to add? Yes, Mark.
Yeah, just going back to what you were saying about the three principles is relatively recent, and as a part of my sort of exploration, I've been going to some Buddhist meditation classes led by a Buddhist monk, and I was at a session last night. And I could spend hours in this lady's company. She is, as to my understanding, she is enlightened, she just absolutely glows. And so much of what is contained in the three principles has been talked about in Buddhism for 2,500 years.
Yeah.
And there's they do advocate that meditation is the way to help you actually achieve that state. And from my own personal experience, and I'm sure many others on the call tonight will have tried that. And I find it an effective way of creating a peaceful mind. Whether it actually gets me anywhere towards having those moments of enlightenment, inspiration, I don't know. But it's not going to happen overnight. And as this lady, this Buddhist nun maintains, is that she's been a Buddhist nun for 15 years and is still on that journey. So I think with the three principles being relatively recent, is that we're all on a long journey here, and you have to keep on practicing.
Well, of course, the principles would say you don't, wouldn't it? I mean, that's where there is a kind of a difference. It's saying you haven't got to practice anything. You've just got to understand it. You just got to see it. But no, I'm not knocking, of course, who am I not knocking Buddhism? I think you're right. It's been pointing to these kinds of truths for thousands and thousands of years. Yeah.
Do you think there's a misunderstanding about the word practice, Kim?
Yeah.
You could change practice for just awareness, and therefore there is a practice in awareness. There's a kind of more familiarity that comes with awareness. But actually, even that research that you were talking about, if you think about what Mark said, there were people who who clearly got to that route via meditation. So that would suggest that there isn't necessarily the one, only the one
that's
way.
right. That's what they said. There definitely seems not to be.
Yeah.
So it's finding what works for you, kind of thing.
Yeah.
But I'm still interested in these spontaneous ones where it wasn't, where it's not even being looked for. I'm just fascinated with those.
And is there any common denominator in his research whatsoever? There's some people will say, and I think Buddhists say this, that extreme suffering will often prompt an enlightenment moment, and yet there are people who've had near-death experiences, which I guess would be a pretty extreme experience as well. I wonder if there is something that happens in the brain as a result of misery, near death. I don't know.
Yeah.
Does his research draw any conclusions with spontaneous ones?
Not really conclusions. So they're examples of all those types you suggest: near death, extreme suffering or trauma. But as I say, there are some that it's none of those. It's literally poof, like somebody's switched a switch. For no apparent reason. But who knows? Karen, how you doing? I haven't spoken to you for ages. You good?
That would help. Yeah, I'm good, thank you.
Oh, good.
Yeah, just listening and thinking about all my thinking and how self-referencing it is. But no, it's been an interesting couple of months, and there's been I had a really interesting moment the other day, because I was explaining to you that I wanted to cope better and not merely survive.
Yes.
And I was, I've now got a new job. So,
yes.
So like, oh my God, how am I going to cope with the scary new job? Back to all the thinking about me and how I'm judged and judging myself. And I remember what you said something about, wasn't there a chap who wrote a book about like fucking it up or something? I can't remember. He had a kind of, his anecdotes were based on this notion of getting it spectacularly wrong. And
yeah.
And I had this
I think, yeah. I hope I screw this up, yeah.
Yeah, that's it, yeah. I had this really clear thought where I just went, there's no such thing as failing. Not now, not conceptually. If you don't, you put it there. And it was just one of those very clear, I don't have them very often, but sometimes you're like, oh my God, it's like it hits you. It was really, really clear, profound thought that actually there's no such thing as failing.
No, there isn't.
So that was quite an interesting moment.
Or succeeding, really.
Well, that's true. I hadn't thought of it that way around, actually.
Yeah, no, but I mean, neither.
I took that to mean I was going to succeed.
No, because we've made both of them up. It's one of the chapters of my book, that old wheel of life. You remember that? And it's like, it was such a big revelation for me when I realized that because I'd been doing it for years and using it as a coaching tool with my clients and everything. And, you carve your life up and then you give yourself a score and then you create an action plan about, how you're going to move your 8s to your 9s and your 4s to 5 and all of that kind of thing. And, I just burst out laughing because I realized that you're just making the whole thing up. You're making up what a 4 is. You're making up what a 10 is. You're making up what a 1 is. Completely constructed.
Yeah.
And then beating yourself up because you're,
Yeah.
But yeah.
I had another, and I never know whether any of this stuff is related to the 3 principles or not. I have a hard time connecting it or seeing if it is or isn't connected, because I think I have a struggle with the definitions of some of the terminology still. I don't quite feel like I get, the differences between mind and thought and all of this stuff. But I saw myself with the eyes of other people, because everybody was asking me, how did you get this new job? How did you get it? You know, well, it wasn't advertised. You know, it's a very different job. How did it come about? And I think at that moment in my life, I saw possibilities and not limitations.
Yes.
And I don't know whether, and I just acted on them.
Yes.
And it's sort of a boundaryless, limitless thing. And it was really interesting to see that reflected back at me.
Yes.
I'm doing my usual, I'm talking about myself again, but...
No, I think you're absolutely right. And it's so interesting when you see that you know, and it's kind of links back to what Andrea was saying about the law of attraction in a way. It's kind of like if you, you know, once you take those limits off around the side of the flip chart paper for yourself, all this stuff starts showing up. Maybe it was always there and you just didn't see it, but all of this stuff starts showing up as possibilities. And yeah, it's great. Well, listen, thank you all very, very much. Yes, Kate. Go, Kate.
Sorry, the people who are in the enlightened state then, when they only see the possibilities, not the limitations. And if they're faced with conflict or judgments in their life, is that all just stripped away?
Yeah, it's just gone. They're like, so if somebody put a gun to their head in the street, they would respond, you know, intelligently and functionally and effectively. But, you know, other than that kind of extreme physical threat, there is no conflict or hassle or suffering. Everything doesn't exist.
Well, I always see it as each limitation is a call to expand. So there is no limitation in that sense, as you say. It's just a call to see things differently.
Tim, just before we sign off, have you got any magic mushrooms?
I'll send you some by first class post.
Thanks, Kim.
No, I haven't. Oh, very good. Well, listen, thank you so much for coming tonight. I will, as I say, I'll do a blog tomorrow or the next day, so you'll be able to link in with the various kind of academic stuff. But thank you very much indeed. Enjoy the rest of your evening. Lots and lots of love. See you soon.
Thanks, bye everybody.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.